I thought I'd seen every absurd stunt in my career, but that morning, I swear I stepped into a glitchy version of The Purge. I was sipping my coffee, still in my robe, when I heard heavy boots stomping up my porch. I opened the door, and my jaw dropped. 3 men in black uniforms, sunglasses, and side holsters stood there, looking like they were about to raid a drug cartel. One of them banged a baton against my doorframe, the sound echoing like a SWAT breach, and stared me down. "Per Willow Oak's internal security code," he barked, "you're under temporary detention for disrupting community order." I froze, my coffee mug halfway to my lips. "Who the hell are you guys?" I asked, my voice a mix of disbelief and amusement. The bald leader smirked, flashing a badge that looked like it came from a dollar store. No case number, no agency, just 3 words stamped in cheap plastic: HOA Police. I blinked, wondering if I'd woken up in some dystopian fever dream. "I'm a retired federal agent, 20 years with the FBI, chasing down mafia bosses, terrorists, and cross-state fugitives. I've seen it all, but I'd never seen an HOA cosplay as a police force, complete with uniforms, logos, and handcuffs, enforcing laws like they were their own sovereign nation." Karen Whitmore, the HOA president, had just declared war on actual justice. These guys weren't just playing dress-up, they were here to detain me, all because I'd refused to repaint my mailbox to match her approved shade of beige. But what Karen didn't know was that I still had friends at the FBI, contacts who'd jump at a case this wild. This wasn't just personal anymore. It was the first piece of evidence in what could become the biggest HOA investigation this state had ever seen. I set my mug down, a slow grin spreading across my face. Karen had just knocked on the wrong door, and I was about to make sure her clipboard kingdom came crashing down. To understand how I got here, facing down 3 HOA goons on my porch, you need to know who I am. I'm Thomas Rayner, a 52-year-old retired FBI agent with 20 years of service under my belt. I spent my career chasing down the worst of the worst: mafia bosses, terrorists, fugitives who thought they could outrun justice. But after my wife, Clara, passed away during an emergency surgery 5 years ago, everything changed. I was left with just my little girl, Lily, who was only 6 at the time. She became my whole world, the only reason I put down my badge, holstered my gun, and walked away from the field. I wanted a quiet life for her, a place where she could grow up without the shadow of danger I'd lived in for so long. So I moved us to Willow Oak, a suburb that sounded like paradise: 24/7 security, tree-lined streets, and an HOA that promised to keep order. But what I didn't know, what no one warned me about, was that the HOA here wasn't about order. It was a cult of control, led by a woman who wielded her clipboard like a scepter. Karen Whitmore, the HOA president, turned my dream of peace into a battlefield from day one. The first week, she fined me because my wind chimes rang at the wrong frequency. Then she came after my car, claiming its black paint was too reflective for the neighborhood's aesthetic. Most recently, she sent a notice accusing me of having a concerning federal past, as if my FBI service was a black mark on her perfect community. I kept my head down, ignoring her petty citations, thinking she'd tire herself out eventually. I was wrong. Karen didn't get tired, she got bolder, climbing her imaginary ladder of power, convinced she was untouchable. That night on my porch, staring at her fake HOA police, I realized this wasn't just about me or Lily anymore. Karen thought she'd reached the top of her ladder, high enough to trample on real laws, to threaten a man who'd spent his life upholding them. But she was about to learn that justice doesn't bend to clipboards, and I still had a few FBI tricks up my sleeve. To understand how I got here, facing down 3 HOA goons on my porch, you need to know who I am. I'm Thomas Rayner, a 52-year-old retired FBI agent with 20 years of service under my belt. I spent my career chasing down the worst of the worst: mafia bosses, terrorists, fugitives who thought they could outrun justice. But after my wife, Clara, passed away during an emergency surgery 5 years ago, everything changed. I was left with just my little girl, Lily, who was only 6 at the time. She became my whole world, the only reason I put down my badge, holstered my gun, and walked away from the field. I wanted a quiet life for her, a place where she could grow up without the shadow of danger I'd lived in for so long. So I moved us to Willow Oak, a suburb that sounded like paradise: 24/7 security, tree-lined streets, and an HOA that promised to keep order. But what I didn't know, what no one warned me about, was that the HOA here wasn't about order. It was a cult of control, led by a woman who wielded her clipboard like a scepter. Karen Whitmore, the HOA president, turned my dream of peace into a battlefield from day one. The first week, she fined me because my wind chimes rang at the wrong frequency. Then she came after my car, claiming its black paint was too reflective for the neighborhood's aesthetic. Most recently, she sent a notice accusing me of having a concerning federal past, as if my FBI service was a black mark on her perfect community. I kept my head down, ignoring her petty citations, thinking she'd tire herself out eventually. I was wrong. Karen didn't get tired, she got bolder, climbing her imaginary ladder of power, convinced she was untouchable. That night on my porch, staring at her fake HOA police, I realized this wasn't just about me or Lily anymore. Karen thought she'd reached the top of her ladder, high enough to trample on real laws, to threaten a man who'd spent his life upholding them. But she was about to learn that justice doesn't bend to clipboards, and I still had a few FBI tricks up my sleeve. It was an early Saturday morning, the kind where the air feels crisp and the neighborhood is still waking up. I was in the kitchen, brewing a pot of coffee, the rich aroma filling the house as I thought about taking Lily to the park later. Suddenly, a sharp sound cut through the quiet, a high-pitched wail, like a mini siren trying to mimic the real thing. I glanced out the window and froze. Down the street, 3 men in black uniforms were inspecting Mr. Geller's house, the 70-year-old widower who lived alone at the end of the block. They were poking around his yard, one of them scribbling on a clipboard, while another taped a notice to his door. Mr. Geller stood on his porch, his hands trembling, looking like he was about to collapse. I didn't hesitate. I bolted out the door, my coffee forgotten, and marched down the street, my FBI instincts kicking in like second nature. "Hey!" I called out, my voice sharp enough to make them turn. "What's going on here? Show me your paperwork." The leader, a stocky guy with a buzz cut, turned to me, his expression smug as he held up a piece of paper. "HOA inspection order," he said, his tone clipped. I took one look at it, a handwritten note, no case number, no official seal, just a scrawled signature at the bottom. Karen T. Whitlock, HOA commander. It was the same kind of fake authority she'd tried to pull on me with her so-called HOA police just days before. That's when it hit me, this wasn't a joke anymore. This was a structured abuse of power, a system Karen had built to terrorize residents under the guise of community standards. I could still hear Mr. Geller's shaky voice from his porch, asking, "Why are you doing this?" as the men ignored him. I stepped back, my jaw tight, and slipped my phone from my pocket. Without a word, I started recording, capturing every move they made, every detail of that fake order. Then I sent the video straight to an old friend at the Department of Justice, a guy I'd worked with on corruption cases back in my FBI days. "We've got a problem," I texted him. "This HOA's gone rogue." The investigation started that day, quietly, like a storm brewing beneath the surface, the kind of deep, rumbling force that tears through a rotting foundation. Karen thought she was untouchable, but she'd just crossed a line that would bring her whole operation down. After that morning with Mr. Geller, I knew I was done playing nice. I'd spent 20 years with the FBI, tracking down criminals who thought they were untouchable, and now I turned those skills on Karen Whitmore and her HOA empire. I started documenting everything, every HOA patrol that rolled through Fairhill Haven in their unmarked vans, every threatening email Karen sent, every meeting where she stood on stage, her clipboard raised like a weapon, shouting, "If the government won't act, we will." I recorded it all, grainy videos of her goons interrogating residents in their driveways, audio of Karen barking orders to find them hard to set an example, even photos of cash transactions with no receipts, all funneled into the HOA's shadowy accounts. I sent everything to my contact at the DOJ, clips of residents being intimidated, Karen's rants, and stacks of handwritten orders she'd signed as HOA commander. When my old FBI colleagues saw the evidence, they were floored. "This isn't just an HOA," one agent said, shaking his head. "They're training a citizen force, collecting cash with no records, and building a self-governing model. It's a cult with a clipboard." While the investigation brewed in the shadows, the internet lit up like a wildfire. I posted a clip of Karen's goons harassing Mr. Geller to our neighborhood's online group, and within hours it spread like a virus. A college kid turned it into a TikTok. "Karen arrests man for LED lights on past curfew," and it racked up 3 million views overnight. Hashtags like #ClipboardKaren and #HOAJustice trended across the state, with memes popping up everywhere. Karen's face photoshopped onto a cartoon dictator, her clipboard labeled "Weapon of Mass Fining." The comments were relentless. This HOA Karen needs to go to jail. Who let her play cop? The online outrage was a tidal wave, and Fairhill Haven was at the center of it all, our quiet suburb now the poster child for HOA tyranny gone wild. But the real power came from the residents themselves. Emboldened by the viral storm, neighbors who'd been silent for years started speaking out, sharing their own horror stories in group chats and local forums. Mrs. Carter revealed she'd been fined $300 for excessive garden gnome height. A young couple down the street posted about a $500 penalty for unapproved patio furniture, paid under threat of eviction. Even Mr. Jenkins, the 80-year-old widower, shared how Karen's team had towed his late wife's car, her last keepsake, because it clashed with the community palate. The stories poured in, each one more outrageous than the last, and it became clear. Karen wasn't just controlling Fairhill Haven. She'd been terrorizing it, ruling through fear with her fake authority. We weren't just gathering evidence anymore, we were building a movement. The residents formed a quiet rebellion, sharing security footage, recordings of Karen's threats, and photos of her handwritten orders. For the first time, Karen wasn't holding the flashlight to spotlight our violations. We were shining it back on her, exposing every dark corner of her HOA reign. She thought she'd silenced us, but she'd just woken a sleeping giant. Just when I thought I'd seen the full extent of Karen's madness, a bombshell dropped that turned this fight into something far bigger than Fairhill Haven. While the hashtag #ClipboardKaren hashtag was still trending and our resistance group was gathering more evidence, I got a call from an old contact at the Department of Treasury, a guy I'd worked with on financial crime cases back in my FBI days. He'd been digging into Karen's past after I sent him the HOA's shady financial records, and what he found made my stomach churn. Karen had been kicked off the city's inspector list years ago after a money laundering scandal in another HOA. She'd been caught forging financial documents to siphon funds for personal use. She wasn't just a petty tyrant with a clipboard. She was a repeat offender, a fraud who'd been playing this game for years. But that wasn't the worst of it. My contact uncovered a paper trail that revealed Karen's real endgame. She wasn't just trying to keep Fairhill Haven clean. She was building a blueprint, a model of control she could scale up. Karen was running for city council, using her HOA reign as a resume to prove her leadership credentials. Every fine, every fake enforcement operation, every intimidation tactic was part of her plan to show she could manage a community with an iron fist. She'd turned Fairhill Haven into her personal experiment, a testing ground for her twisted vision of power, where she could terrorize residents into submission and then tout her success to voters. The HOA funds she'd collected, hundreds of thousands in fines and fees, were being funneled into her campaign, all while she claimed to be protecting the neighborhood. And then came the chilling realization: her HOA police weren't there to keep us safe, they were there to create enemies. Karen had painted me as her perfect villain, the former FBI agent disrupting community harmony, a symbolic foe she could defeat to boost her image. She'd turned me into the centerpiece of her silent campaign, a scapegoat to rally her supporters around. Every move she'd made, the fines, the threats, the fake arrest attempts, was calculated to make her look like a hero taking down a troublemaker. But she didn't know I'd already turned the tables, gathering evidence that would expose her for the fraud she was. Karen thought she was building an empire of control, but she'd just lit the fuse on her own downfall. What happens when a power-hungry HOA Karen underestimates a retired FBI agent with the law on his side? You're about to see her clipboard crown shatter. The stage was set for the ultimate showdown, and I made sure every piece was in place. I'd invited the local press to Fairhill Haven under the guise of introducing a new self-governance model, a bait Karen couldn't resist. She showed up at the community center, clipboard in hand, her collared shirt starched to perfection, ready to bask in the spotlight. The room was packed, residents, reporters, even a few city council members she'd been wooing for her campaign. Karen took the stage, her voice booming with confidence as she led her HOA police in a staged neighborhood security drill, complete with mock patrols and fake arrests to show off her leadership. She beamed, soaking in the attention, oblivious to the storm I'd orchestrated. That's when the doors swung open, and the FBI walked in, 5 agents in dark suits, badges gleaming, flanked by local police. The lead agent stepped forward, his voice cutting through the room like a gunshot. "Karen Whitlock," he announced, holding up a warrant. "You're under investigation for impersonating law enforcement, misappropriating HOA funds, and organizing an unauthorized civilian militia." The crowd gasped, cameras flashing as Karen's face turned pale, her clipboard slipping from her hands with a clatter. She stumbled back, her confident facade cracking like thin ice, and tried to salvage her image. "We're just trying to keep the community safe," she stammered, her voice rising in desperation as she looked to the crowd for support. But the residents weren't buying it anymore. Mrs. Jenkins, a frail 82-year-old who'd been fined for planting lavender without approval, stood up, her voice trembling with fury. "Then why did you harass me for growing flowers?" she shouted, pointing a shaky finger at Karen. The room erupted. Neighbors clapped, some shouted, others wiped away tears as years of pent-up frustration poured out. Karen's eyes darted around, searching for an escape, but the agents were already closing in, handcuffs gleaming. She let out a final, desperate wail as they led her away, her cries echoing, "This is a conspiracy!" But no one was listening anymore. The crowd drowned her out with applause, their cheers a thunderous wave of relief and triumph. For the first time, Karen's clipboard couldn't save her. The cameras caught every moment, her downfall broadcast live on the evening news, her reign of terror over Fairhill Haven finally shattered. I stood in the back, watching it all unfold, my SWAT trainer badge still in my pocket. This wasn't just about me or Lily. It was about a community taking back its freedom from a tyrant who thought she was above the law. Justice had spoken, and Karen had nowhere left to hide. The very next day, the Willow Oak HOA rules sign, a gaudy metal plaque that had loomed over the neighborhood like a dictator's banner, was taken down for good. Mr. Geller, the 70-year-old widower Karen, had once fined for leaving a screwdriver in his yard, led the charge. With a determined glint in his eye, he grabbed the very screwdriver she'd forced him to buy to meet HOA safety standards, and started unscrewing the bolts, one by one. Neighbors gathered around, cheering as each screw came loose, the sign crashing to the ground with a satisfying thud. It wasn't just a sign coming down. It was the end of an era, the collapse of Karen's reign of terror in Fairhill Haven. The residents didn't waste any time. We formed a new self-governance council. No president, no power trips, just neighbors working together. The city stepped in, passing new rules. Any civilian organization had to register transparently, and no one could wear uniforms mimicking law enforcement ever again. Willow Oak went back to being a real neighborhood. No more fine notices taped to doors, no more fake cops lurking in vans. Instead, there were invitations to weekend barbecues, kids playing tag in the streets, and the smell of grilled hot dogs wafting through the air. The community was alive again, free from the shadow of Karen's clipboard. I watched it all unfold, standing on my porch with a coffee in hand, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. Dylan was out there, laughing with his friends, his eyes bright with the kind of joy a kid should always have. I'd kept my promise to him, to give him a safe place to grow up, free from the fear Karen had sown. Fairhill Haven wasn't just a neighborhood anymore. It was a testament to what happens when people stand up to bullies, clipboard or not. A few months later, Karen was gone for good. She'd been convicted on 5 criminal charges: fraud, extortion, impersonating law enforcement, among others, facing up to 12 years in prison. Her house was sold at auction, the proceeds going to compensate the HOA's victims, every penny of her little empire stripped away. The signs, the uniforms, the clipboard, all of it crumbled, just like the rusted HOA rules sign Mr. Geller had torn down. At the entrance to Fairhill Haven, a new wooden sign went up, carved by the residents: Willow Oak, HOA-free zone. Real people, real safety. It stood as a quiet promise, a reminder of the freedom we'd fought for. I went back to being just a dad, a neighbor, not a retired agent or a symbol of resistance. One morning, as I flipped pancakes in the kitchen, Lily looked up from her plate, her eyes sparkling with mischief. "Dad, can we leave the backyard lights on all night today?" she asked, a grin spreading across her face. I laughed, ruffling her hair. "You can leave them on all year if you want, kiddo," I said, my heart lighter than it had been in years. I'd always thought justice was something that happened in courtrooms with gavels and robes, but I was wrong. Sometimes it starts with a knock on the wrong door, a fake badge, and a community that refuses to back down. Karen thought she could play cop, but she'd underestimated the real power of Fairhill Haven, and the dad who'd do anything to protect his little girl. Ever had an HOA Karen try to run your life? Drop your story in the comments. I want to hear how you fought back.